It was an accident. It could have happened to anyone. Which makes me wonder why it had to happen to me. I've worked construction for years. Never gotten so much as a deep cut or a broken bone. Bruises sometimes, maybe minor cuts, but nothing that stopped me from coming in the next day. It was just a typical day. I was performing an inspection, chatting with a buddy on the job site, listening to the sounds of an active construction site as it thrummed around me. The insurance would try to prove that I hadn't been wearing my safety gear, but I had witnesses to attest that I was wearing my goggles, my hard hat, and all my OSHA-approved gear when it happened. The drug tests I was submitted to showed I had nothing in my system stronger than a bagel I'd had for breakfast. It was not the fault of anyone besides whoever had attached the rebar. And even then, it was no fault of the welder. It had simply come loose and stood there waiting for me to be careless. On that day, I turned suddenly as I inspected an area of the basement, when a jutting piece of rebar, which I had made a note of 1,000 times, pierced my safety goggles and stabbed into my left eye. The members of my crew found me on the floor of the basement as I started to scream. The piece of rebar had gone through my goggles due to a slight fracture in the lens. That plus my forward momentum had caused the lens to break and my eye to be damaged. The rebar, as it happened, had been covered in dust. The dust caused the cut to become infected with a virulent strain of bacteria and required the eye to be removed. I tell you all this to explain how I came to be in the hospital bed minus an eye, and strapped to the bed as soon as I finished writing this, since they now fear that I might be a danger to myself. That's getting a little ahead in the story. It started the first night after I lost my eye. I'd been rushed to the ER right away. The prognosis had been bad almost once. There was definite damage. There was a virulent strain of bacteria in the wound that was reacting badly. It was decided that it would be best if the eye was removed immediately to save my face. They were keeping me overnight to monitor the wound, make sure that they got all the bacteria, make sure the wound would heal properly. I remember lying there before I drifted off, trying to come to terms with my new vision, wondering how different life would be with only one eye. Then I drifted off. I was suddenly greeted by a terrible sight. I was looking through a single eye, staring up at a red, unbroken sky, the color of old flames. Long runners of fire like falling stars cascading down. And though I couldn't hear anything, my point of view shook with near constant vibrations. It was low, making me think I was less than an inch tall, and though I could look around, I couldn't move. Things were moving around. Creatures of perverted geometry. They lumbered about as though every step pained them greatly. As I watched, something long and spidery like a needle with wings descended on me, its long proboscis growing as it landed astride my point of view. As the needle came down towards me, I awoke screaming. The nurses tried to calm me, telling me that I just had a nightmare. I tried to drift back to sleep. Visions of the smoldering plane still in my head. The next time I closed my eyes, I was staring up into the crimson sky again. The fire was still raining down, but now I was staring at an absolute horror of a creature as it cocked its head in nearly feline ferocity. It looked almost skeletal, like a Halloween decoration that moved a little too well. As I watched it, it scuttled a little closer, stalking my point of view. Its eye sockets were bare, I thought. But the closer it got, the better I could see a pair of bright red pinpricks in the depth of those cavernous sockets. Its ink-black tongue would flick out every now and again, so he could moisten his seemingly bony lips. It was skulking on all 6 strangling, jointed legs, and it reminded me of Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon movies. Toothless's skeleton, at least. It cocked its head as it towered over me, and when it opened its mouth, I felt another scream break through my sleeping lips. Its mouth was like a garbage disposal full of teeth, 2 sets spinning in a circular buzzsaw pattern as it hissed and screamed. The scream could have broken glass, and my ears actually started bleeding as it screeched over me. The head snapped down, strange teeth covering my point of view, and I awoke to 2 orderlies restraining me. That's when someone stuck a needle in my neck, and I was left in a mercifully dreamless sleep. But dreams were the least of my worries that night. I was treated to the same sky, that same amber sky, until the drugs wore off. In that time, I saw those lumbering giants make their way across that blasted land. I saw human beings as they trudged across burning earth, trampled to death by those lumbering behemoths, or hunted and maimed by those skeletal horrors, like little burnt tan creatures, almost like frogs that had learned to walk, capered around, shoving and kicking at the naked, stumbling humans that walked around confusedly. Their skin was seared, their bodies bleeding, but no matter what happened to them, they just kept screaming and writhing in endless pain. The vision went on, an endless hell that I was forced to watch as the world on the other side. I don't know if it was heaven or hell, but the only light that remained the same was the crimson sky and the burning rain. For the rest of the day, I was kept in a medically induced state, living in that hell, seeing those atrocities. In that time, it felt as though I slept for years. Time had no meaning in that place. The lumbering beasts became a sort of rude clock for me. They would lumber by periodically, and I would mark that as an hour. Their footsteps would shake the ground, making my peripherals shudder, and my vision felt like a ripple in a pond. Of the strange skeletal creature, there was very little to see after the first time. None of them approached me again, and the mosquito creatures also kept their distance. I suppose they hadn't found me particularly tasty, so they were content to leave me alone. That was until one of the little brown creatures came to investigate. I had been staring at the amber sky for 2 passes of the lumbering beasts when a face that only a mother could love swam up to me out of the void. It was so sudden that I yelped internally, not really sure what to do now that something living was so close again. Nothing had come to bother me for so long that I had begun to think my position was going to remain this dull until I eventually came out of this state. The ugly, lumpy creature bent down, bringing his face very close to my position before, wrapping a hand around me and bathing me in far too welcome darkness. Light peeked through its fingers as we ran. But that seemed to be the point where the drugs began to wear off, and I started coming out. I squinted my one remaining eye at the heavy rays of the afternoon sun, and felt my stomach rumble at the tray that sat before me. When the nurse came in smiling, she watched me eating. I asked her how long I'd been out. I expected to be weeks, maybe a month. She told me it was about 12 hours. Felt as though I'd spent years in that terrible place. Counted out days' worth of hours by passing of creatures, and I found that I never wanted to go back again. I wasn't sure if it was the act of sleeping or just the act of closing my eye, but I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself from sleep. This wasn't particularly hard. I'd been asleep for 12 hours straight. But as the night wound on, the feeling of heavy eyelids became harder and harder to ignore. The TV shows became less and less stimulating, the bed became more and more comfortable, and my head began to dip and slide towards my chest. They wouldn't let me have coffee for some reason, and the water was cutting it not at all. I made it till just after sunrise somehow, but as I slipped into unconsciousness, I was greeted with something worse than I could have ever imagined. As I slipped off, I was treated to the worst vision yet. I was sitting high now, in a throne room straight from the mind of Wes Craven. When they speak of otherworldly geometry in Lovecraft, I have to believe that they've seen this place. Nothing was equal. Nothing congruent. The angles hurt to look at. The edges were like razor blades. And the builder was either mad or driven there by the construction of this unholy space. When you hear this, you won't understand, but I ask you to try. The room looked like it was designed to inspire anxiety, foster nightmares, and put the inhabitants on edge until madness swallowed them whole. The whole room was a dirty white. It was not off-white. It was not dark white. It was a filthy white. I had seen the way windows look when they're caked in mud, and that was the color. It made my skin crawl, or it would have if I had any skin at that moment. The color was throughout, and the feeling it gave me, coupled with the anxiety from the construct I was now inside, made me want to shudder and vomit at the same time. It was filled with pews, which were filled with the muddy frog creatures I had seen before. They were all manner of sizes, their lumpy bodies pressed into those seats as they sat in a rapture of, well, me, it seemed. They were dressed in strange garments that I can only describe as fancy rags, and as I watched, the show began. A line of the naked, screaming people were dragged forward, unclothed brown creatures prodding them with sticks, and they looked at me in horror as they approached me. These people were in terrible shape. The best among them was bruised and dirty, but some were lucky to be standing. I could see bodies burned to the white meat, bones poking from them, eyes and limbs missing, but the most horrifying part was how these injuries seemed not to bother them. They were filthy and afraid, but I got the feeling that their injuries were secondary in their mind. As the first one was pushed towards me, the brown creature opened its mouth and spoke in a voice like a well filled with water. "We have rounded these cattle up for punishment, my lord." I was confused as the brown-haired man, who was roughly my age, stumbled forward, but I couldn't have long to revel in the lack of knowledge. "Who dares trespass within my realm?" I heard it, and turned though I had no body. I was held aloft on a pedestal, and the creature beside me seemed to be my captor. It was beyond any earthly description. But I'll try. Imagine if one of those Jim Henson skeksis had all their skin burn off of it, down to the bone, and they had the flesh reapplied badly, with red and brown Play-Doh. Its eyes were piss-yellow slits, its jaws were beak-like and sharp-looking, and its flesh appeared to be oozing as it spoke in a thick, deep voice like a frog at the bottom of a ravine. It spoke to the brown creatures, telling them how they wanted the people tortured. And then it suddenly noticed me. Turning its head and smiling as it saw me looking at it. Its pleasure was even worse than its anger. "See what awaits you, human. Witness and despair," it croakingly hissed. I came awake screaming again, and thankfully, they didn't put me under this time. I've been in restraints for 4 days now. They transferred me to a psychiatric ward, and the straps were to stop me from digging at my skin. I've been awake for 4 days, refusing to go to sleep because every time I nod off, I'm returned to that hateful place. I gaze upon the creature as he passes judgment, never sleeping, never leaving, and I wake up screaming. I've begged my doctor not to sedate me, but I think they will before long. I'm writing this under heavy supervision, trying to explain it to my doctor since words seem to have failed me. I'm hoping he understands that despite my state, I don't want to hurt myself. I've seen what lies beyond. It is not something I'm in a hurry to get to. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and thank you for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's podcast. I want to tell you about one quick thing before we say goodbye for the evening, and that's going to be about the MrCreepyPasta plush! There's a brand new plush that's available, and this is going to be running on, like, every single video, I think, for at least a couple of weeks for the entirety of this campaign, because the plush is only available for a limited time. So if you guys head over to makeship.com, then you guys are able to get this MrCreepyPasta plush. It's super cool. I worked with the original person who designed my character to be able to create this plush, and I think it's something that you guys will really love. It glows in the dark, which is really cool, and he's super soft and cuddly. So it's makeship.com, makeship.com/products/MrCreepyPasta-plush. Or you know what's easier? Makeship.com. There you go. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who is supporting me on Patreon. A huge thank you to patrons, such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Bryon Arce, Bobby Karman, Stephanie Butler, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, William King, Heather McDonald, Reaper61167, Alex the Sandwich, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Ness69420, aisodoehtraed with 2 exclamation points, Nessie, Ronnie Hansen, Bardohawk764, Melancholy Corpse, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Madam Skullbunny, Sashi Sazaku, Grizzly Olsen.pro, Kayden the Spooky Boy, Zane Nightshade, MyBodySoundsLikeRiceKrispys, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Miss Exandra, Mr. Unsettling Spaghetti, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Fried Chicken 12, Freddy Krueger, Ty Nanny, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Nels, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nina Smith, Nico Cayo, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trey Smiles, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much, so much for being a part of the Patreon and helping me keep the lights on and helping me get exclusive stories and everything that we do on the channel here. It really means so much to me. I hope you all have a very happy Halloween and sweet dreams.